Welcome to our roundtable discussion, The Well-Kept Secrets for Developer and Organization-Friendly IDPs. Internal developer platforms, or IDPs, are a new kind of paradigm for cloud engineering, but they do not come without controversy. This includes opinions about how to pick an IDP, set it up, and how they fit within the current state of cloud engineering, while positioning them for success within an organization in line with modern development practices. My name is Sean Harris. I'm the Developer Relations Lead at Spot by NetApp, as well as a recovering practitioner, where I have led DevOps and DevSecOps teams on their IDP journey, and I will be your moderator and host today. We hope you will find our discussion beneficial and some points of view to enable your success, despite a vacuum of standards in this relatively new and uncharted space within cloud engineering. Today, we are joined by some guests who will help us unpack and give us their tips from their experiences standing up and using IDPs as part of their engineering efforts. We're going to talk about 4 key topics during our time today. First, how do you measure success of an IDP once you've put it into place? Second, how do you iterate from a minimum viable product to a gold standard IDP? Third, how do you even start and identify and source an IDP in the first place? And finally, fourth, how does optimization of your cloud workloads factor into an IDP? And why does optimization have to be included when selecting that IDP inside of your organization? How's everybody doing today?
Great.
Doing good.
Amazing.
I want to thank you guys all for taking time out of your day to join us. And I guess we'll start off with an opening question, and I'll leave this to whoever wants to answer. When it comes to your experiences in the IDP space, what is the most commonly desired result that you see when somebody says, I'm trying to put together an IDP. I don't know where to start. I don't know what the definition is, but I know I want it to do X. Like, what's that common X that people are trying to solve for when it comes to deploying an IDP? Is it to make them faster? Is it to standardize? Or is it a combination of all of the above? Like, why are we moving toward, why the big push to move to IDPs?
I would say the North Star of any platform team, right? You want to enable your application teams to deliver software faster with better reliability to more markets. Or substitute out if you're working in a nonprofit organization or government organization to serve your constituents better, or whatever the organizational goal is. But fundamentally, it's about delivering faster with better reliability. That also includes compliance and cost controls as well, to further the goals of whatever your organization's goals are.
I would add another point of view. Again, I'm looking at the big organizations in their beginning of their move to the cloud. So before even getting things better, the first IDP would be getting things done. It's like actually deploying the first workload, actually deploying, how do you deploy a web service? How do you deploy a container? How do you even start using the cloud resources? So it's really the basics in the beginning before you get into let's do them better. It's just let's start. That's the first things you build into an IDP. And security, which in big organization is something that you really need to build from the beginning. You need to allow different groups to edit resources in the cloud, and they have to be completely separated from each other without any view into others' code and deployments.
So let me maybe try and tie those two things together and add on my own perspective as well. Think of it as a journey. So you have an organization that's not running on the cloud yet, and there's this big digital transformation effort, and there's the potential for a lot of cost saving and a lot of benefits and velocity. And they say, okay, we're moving to the cloud. That's a management decision, right? None of the developers necessarily have experience working with the cloud. And there's this big thing. And the first thing you want to do on that journey is okay, let's map it out. Let's see what actually is out there today. Maybe some of the teams actually are already running stuff in the cloud, to get a picture of what's going on. Because if you don't have that map, then how are you going to navigate your journey and know what's going on? So then you pull in the stuff that's more service catalog-y, what's out there today. And you put in the links to redocumentation just to get a picture. And then now you're starting to move and you're putting more workloads on. And a lot of times people don't always have the expertise, or it's very repetitive, or you want to have certain controls in place around security, like Yonit said. So now people bring in the scaffolding features, right? I want to let teams get up and running more easily. And then comes now you have some stuff running, and then comes day 2, right? And this really ties back into what Josh said. Okay, well, I have all these applications out there. Why are they reliable, right? And how do I maintain that bar? And then I have a really strong opinion, also on day 2. We moved to the cloud, But it turns out our organization doesn't really know cloud native. So how do you handle the problems that occur and troubleshoot them more efficiently? And how do you focus up the right data and respond to incidents faster in a world that is fundamentally different than the world that you are at pre-digital transformation? And it might be better. There's a promise there with all these benefits. But as you go on that journey, you are often bringing along a very large workforce of fantastic enterprise developers who have great expertise in programming and business logic and in other areas, but who don't always have the expertise yet with the cloud. So to me, it's about how at each stage of that journey, do you enable people to become better and to be faster while still maintaining the standards?
How do guardrails come into play, Josh, when it comes to IDPs, and how do you manage the growth of those guardrails and scale those protections so that nobody's blowing your infrastructure out of the water? How do you wrap that balance between needing to enable developers but also needing to protect your cloud spend?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, well, first off, when it comes to guardrails, right, the first one is compliance and like regulatory, right? And in my view, the right way to do that is through policy as code. Hopefully, you have a tool that will enable your security folks to set the policy, and then your platform team can plug in those policies into their pipelines to ensure that only compliant infrastructure is actually deployed to the production environment. Because breaches are over provisioning is expensive, but oftentimes not as expensive as, say, like HIPAA violations, which can be really expensive. That's health regulation in the United States. So that's where I would start, is with compliance, right? Because that will very quickly get you the negative attention of your C-suite if you goof up in those areas. And then like costs can come into it. So I think that you need to have cost visible at all points. So before you provision something, it is certainly helpful to know, like, hey, what's the approximate cost per month for this? Likewise, when things are running, because you're going to be dealing with things like dynamic scaling, which is one of the key parts of cloud native application development, is that things are going to scale dynamically based on resource usage. And so, those things need to be visible to your application teams as well. They don't necessarily have to solve all of those problems themselves, but it's certainly at the very start, the platform team's responsibility to make those things visible to the various application teams, possibly to put alarms around those things. So that would be something that should be like billing alerts and things like that. Those should be exclusively the purview of the platform team. It's not fair to make an application team worry about that. But then to make them visible to the application teams, and then also to be there as a platform team to help them resolve those issues and say, okay, well, maybe this is over provisioned, or we need to, not retain these logs in this particular type of storage for so long, things like that.
I want to come back to the idea of observability and orchestration here in a second. But as you were talking about some of that complexity, it brought up a good point. Yonit, your experience is public sector, and you've got a lot of exposure to that. And we're talking about a lot of new, fascinating technology that sometimes public sector and higher ed can be slower to adopt. What have you seen when it comes to the adoption in that public sector, higher ed space of adopting IDPs for their workflows? And what are some of the barriers that they've had to overcome? And is it getting easier to overcome those barriers, or are they still struggling to move at the scale of DevOps, or at the speed of DevOps, as I like to call it?
Yeah. When you look at the big organizations starting to use the cloud, so you have building up a landing zone, building the infrastructure, and I'm going to separate between the platform engineering group and, of course, the actual users, which are those that build applications. The first one who actually see the systems would be the platform engineering group. And one of the things that I noticed is that they have to build. There's a term called the shift left and shift down, which is to put the security in the beginning of the process, either of application deployments or in the cloud infrastructure as well. So you want to put everything in there, also security and also FinOps. You want to build it into the infrastructure and into the IDP, either as a plugin to an IDP or into the IDP itself. You want to put in the FinOps and the part where you save the money, and you actually tell the developers you're going to use this and these tools, like in the bus ride in our example. you're going to use these tools and they will save you the money, and this is how you're going to use it. We're going to give you the infrastructure and you will just deploy over it. And it should be built into the IDP. And this is part of the steps that I see being happen. Like the infrastructure is built with security in the beginning baked into it, and FinOps as well. Now, one of the things that I see also in big organization is that the FinOps is still the FinOps of the past, in which you had someone, he had like a yearly budget, and they would decide up ahead about the yearly budget and say which hardware are we going to buy in the next year and approve it, and they have this budget to fill. And suddenly now they have a dynamic budget, which can, in some cases, blow off and create an unexpected hole in the expenses. So these are the things that should be built early into the IDP, into how the developers are using the system, putting in the brakes so they are not able to spend suddenly huge amounts of money. And that should be part of the guardrails enveloping the IDP system that's built for them. That's part of the basics that needed. Just like security, FinOps should be in the beginning. It's a complete different way of thinking for those big organizations.
Well, I think that's like we've been talking about observability as part of an IDP program. And I agree with you. I think FinOps needs to be included. And I think that's the key to operationalizing that. Historically, though, coming from my engineering background, where I didn't care about cloud spend until it hit that bottom line, are there ways to operationalize FinOps inside of an IDP that makes it more palatable for engineers to buy into the idea of FinOps? Right? Is there a way to bake those ideas in, and it's short of saying the beatings will commence until you get the cloud spend down to an appropriate level? Is there a way to get them to buy in and feel like operational partners when it comes to that idea of FinOps visibility in an IDP?
Well, budgeting and budget reports and budget dashboards and all that world, it shows them exactly how much they're spending. One of the things you can put in an IDP is labeling everything, so you can get detailed reports for any specific application, for the development environment and for the production environment, and see exactly how much each part of those costs. So labeling and enforcing labeling in the IDP level would be a good tip. So you can do the billing mathematics afterwards. Also, for example, if you want to expose a container, you would need to calculate how much this container needs to be online, and then you can tell which of the tools is the best way to expose that container, because there are multiple container runtime environments in each cloud. So you would like to be able to help the developer design, maybe add something into the IDP like a calculator, helping them design how much uptime do you think you will need for this container, and then choose which of the runtime environment would be the best to host it from the FinOps perspective.
You're teaching FinOps principles as part of the engineering effort, as opposed to getting them to fall in line with the ideas of FinOps after the fact, right? You're starting your product and your IDP with FinOps in mind, and that cost and optimization in mind, right? Sizing appropriately, scaling appropriately, calling the right resources at the right time, which is why we use the cloud. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, okay. But you have multiple ways of doing the same thing in the cloud, and each one has a different costs, and it depends on the application needs that which one of those multiple ways is the best one.
What you have to do is you have to translate it from DevOps or from infrastructure terms to terms that the application developer understands. So like if you go to an application developer, like Yonit said, and you say, okay, well, what's the type of availability that you need for this service? What's acceptable latency or whatever? Like they generally have a good idea. If you go to an application developer and you say, okay, how much CPU do you think you need? No. If you say, here's the historical CPU usage, and what do you think would be the right number? Like, is it okay if we at this? Here's a graph of that. Like, that's actually pretty easy to answer. If you go to them and you say, okay, do you want a type T2 burst medium node, or do you want like, I don't know, you can give me some other real node type out there, but like a D2 medium, I mean, they're probably not going to know what the difference is between those. I do a lot with that, and I don't remember off the back of my hand. So you have to take the terms and you have to translate into something that the application developer, one, can understand, is related to his area of expertise, and two, that he understands the implications of, and three, that he can do something about, right? If you can't do anything about it, like if you're over provisioning your nodes, you're probably not going to go to the application developer if he's just provisioning an auto-scaled application. Like you have to speak on the terms that they understand.
Another useful tool in that bucket is I think it's very reasonable to ask application teams to, if not entirely formulate their SLOs themselves, to at least contribute to formulating them with someone with greater operational expertise. And then those SLOs are going to determine how much you actually need to provision. Because if you are way exceeding your SLOs, then it's very possible you might have over provisioned resources. And the SLOs and that availability, all comes down to the business value of the application, which the application team should be able to understand and articulate.
That's a really good point that I've never really thought of, is getting the developers to help define the SLOs, right? Like they don't have to own it, right? They don't have to, we can go in and they can tell us what they need, right? They know better than we do as platform and infrastructure teams.
Yeah, and that could be
point.
That is part of I would consider it to be that those SLOs need to be defined as part of any sort of production readiness checklist. And so, when your platform is sufficiently evolved, it should also be provisioning, alerting, SLOs, and then alerts and on-call rotations and all of those operational needs, as well as the infrastructure that the application itself is running on.
That's really a great point that I don't think we talk about enough, is that collaboration between the teams, right? We use these IDPs not to silo further, but to enable and foster that collaboration. DevOps is all about automation and orchestration, right? It's all about speed. It's all about making sure that you're doing things in a repeatable manner. How does optimization of your cloud infrastructure come into that? And does it, right? Is optimization something that needs to be automated, or is automation something you can do on your own? And how important is it, if it is part of that automation strategy, that we align with DevOps and platform engineering and now IDPs?
Well, cost controls are clearly more important now that we are no longer in the zero interest rate era. So I think that first and foremost, right, the economic circumstances have changed, and now it is very important. Whereas, if you look at, for example, AWS's well-architected framework, of course they have their own economic interest in this, but cost controls were always the last thing that you worried about. And I don't know whether that is still their recommended approach, but clearly, it's a lot more important than it used to be, because money's not free anymore. So I'd start with that. But I think that again, it comes back to making it visible. You need to make these things visible. Clearly, dynamic scaling is probably going to be more cost efficient than static provisioning. But your application workload has to be able to support that. And not all workloads can, or it's not always feasible to do the work to refactor them to make them support that. I mean, a couple of jobs ago, I worked at a company that was doing well. It was profitable, but we couldn't get off of sticky sessions. The code that would have to change, it was a shocking amount of effort that we figured it would take to get off of that. And as far as I know, they're still running with sticky sessions. So obviously dynamic scaling is not really going to be feasible. So you still have to work within the confines of the application code. I think that the application code ultimately is what is going to be delivering the most value. And that you have to work with what is feasible with the application code.
That's a great point.
Well, I think that in the case, it's a valid point, it's a great point, and as well as the code itself that should be part of the cost-effective and FinOps process. Many of the developers in these organizations, they do not see the cloud, they do not see the infrastructure beneath, they have no idea, they have this IDP abstraction layer, they actually don't know what's running on the back end. So I think the FinOps and cost figuring should be part of the IDP itself, whether adding plugins that help to do the cost reductions in different hardware, or building it into the IDP itself. But it should be part of that, because many of the developers actually are not aware of the cloud. And actually, I think a good IDP would be a cloud agnostic for the developers, so they shouldn't even know what is the hardware underneath their application. So I think the cost should be baked well into the IDPs themselves.
Again, I want to thank all of our guests today for what has been an insightful discussion. We've all agreed that an IDP can play a pivotal role in your organization's journey to scalability. As your IDP grows, you have to start incorporating optimization by design. This goes beyond the traditional idea of compute and data infrastructure, and deployment has to encapsulate everything that is running in, on, and around your cloud. You can learn more about our approach to IDPs and our solutions by visiting us at https://www.spot.io.
And with that, I'll thank our guests one last time and thank you for joining us as we've talked about IDPs and the importance of them.